The silence of the void was a lie, a comforting fiction told to children on crowded terrariums spinning in the manufactured light of a dozen suns. Out here, in the abyssal gulf between the Orion and Perseus arms, silence screamed. It was a pressure, a physical weight that pressed in on the hull of the Stardust Drifter, a decommissioned asteroid hauler that groaned like a dying beast with every slow, deliberate turn. Elias Thorne knew this sound better than his own heartbeat. For 27 standard cycles, he had listened to the groans, the creaks, the shuddering sighs of his ship, a symphony of decay that was both his prison and his sanctuary. He sat in the worn command chair, the synth leather cracked and peeling under his calloused fingers, and stared at the star-dusted canvas of the forward view screen. The drifter was his own small universe, a 10,000-ton bubble of recycled air and flickering lights adrift in an ocean of nothing. He liked it that way. The nothing was predictable. It was the something that always got you, and for the past 3 rotations, something had been whispering. It started as a ghost in the machine, a flicker in the calm static that his diagnostic programs dismissed as residual radiation from the Veil Nebula, a shimmering cosmic shroud they had skirted weeks ago. But the whispers grew, coalescing from random noise into a structured, rhythmic pattern that defied every known principle of astrophysics. It was a song, Elias thought, a mournful, cyclical melody that seemed to resonate not in the air, but in the very iron of his blood. His only companion, a repurposed maintenance android he called Tin Can, stood silently by the main engineering console, its single photoreceptor glowing a placid blue. "Anything?" Elias asked, his voice a low rasp, unused for days. Tin Can's head swiveled with a soft whir of servos. "Negative, Captain Thorne. All ship systems continue to report nominal function." The anomalous signal persists, originating from coordinates 209er by Theta 4. Source remains unidentified. Probability of natural stellar phenomenon 1.012%. Probability of artificial origin indeterminate. Indeterminate. That was the word that scraped along Elias's nerves like a rusty blade. He'd spent a lifetime cataloging the determinate, the predictable, the boringly sane. He was a junk hauler, a glorified garbage man of the spaceways, chasing down dead satellites and forgotten survey drones for the meager credits they'd fetch at scrapyards on Titan or Europa. He wasn't an explorer. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man trying to outrun the ghosts of a life he'd left behind on a blue-green world he no longer remembered with any fondness. He ran a hand over his tired face, the gray stubble scratching at his palm. The song was louder now, a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate up from the deck plates. It was beautiful and terrifying. A siren call from the deep. He should have turned back. He should have engaged the FTL drive and put 100 light years between the Stardust Drifter and whatever was singing that impossible tune. But curiosity, that most dangerous and human of vices, had its hooks in him. And besides, his fuel reserves were dangerously low. A jump to the nearest civilized system was a gamble he wasn't sure he'd win. "Take us closer, Tin Can," he said, the words feeling like a betrayal of every survival instinct he possessed. "Slow and steady. Full sensor sweep. I want to know what's making that noise." The android tilted its head. "Acknowledged. Captain, adjusting course. Recommend raising deflector shields to level 2 as a precautionary measure." Elias grunted in agreement, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. The ship's engines, old but reliable plasma thrusters, pulsed gently, nudging the cumbersome vessel toward the source of the signal. The coordinates pointed to a patch of space that was, according to his charts, utterly empty. No stars, no planets, no rogue asteroids, just a blank spot on the map. A cartographer's shrug labeled the silent patch. It seemed the name was a lie. As they drew nearer, the song intensified. It was no longer a whisper, but a chorus. A complex harmony of frequencies that seemed to pluck at the very fabric of space-time. The ship's internal lights began to flicker in time with the rhythm, and a low, resonant thrumming echoed through the corridors. Mira, a botanist he'd picked up on Ganymede Station, emerged from the ship's small hydroponics bay, her face pale. She was a stowaway of sorts, a woman with ghosts of her own, who had traded her expertise in growing nutrient paste in zero-G for a no-questions-asked passage to the outer systems. "Elias, what is that?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. She clutched a datapad to her chest like a shield. "My grow lights are strobing. The atmospheric regulators are fluctuating with the beat." Elias didn't take his eyes off the view screen. The empty patch of space was no longer empty. A faint, ethereal glow was beginning to resolve itself out of the blackness. A shimmering, opalescent nebula where none should exist. "I don't know," he admitted, his own heart hammering against his ribs in a syncopated rhythm with the alien music. "Tin Can, what are we seeing? The phenomenon is emitting multi-spectrum radiation." "Captain," the android reported, its voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the growing unease on the bridge. "Visual analysis suggests a cloud of ionized gas and exotic particles. However, its energy signature is paradoxical. It appears to be absorbing ambient light and energy while simultaneously emitting a highly focused, structured signal. The laws of thermodynamics are not being violated, but they are being creatively interpreted." Creatively interpreted? Elias almost laughed. The universe had a sick sense of humor. The glowing cloud pulsed, a soft, rhythmic beat of light that matched the song in their heads. It was like they were approaching a living, breathing creature the size of a small moon. And then the melody changed. A new voice joined the chorus, a high, piercing note that cut through the low hum like a shard of glass. On the view screen, a pinpoint of brilliant white light ignited in the center of the nebula. It grew with alarming speed, a star being born in fast forward. Elias's training, what little he had from a brief and ill-fated stint in the corporate security forces, kicked in. "Shields to maximum brace for impact," he yelled, his hands flying over the console, trying to divert power from non-essential systems. Mira stumbled, catching herself on the back of his chair. The ship lurched as if struck by a physical wave. Alarms blared, a cacophony of panicked beeps and screeching sirens that warred with the celestial music. The white light on the screen was blinding, a miniature sun that bleached all color from the bridge. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The alarms fell silent. The ship stopped shuddering. The blinding light receded, collapsing back into the heart of the nebula. The song, however, continued, its melody now more intricate, more complex, as if the new voice had completed the symphony. Elias blinked, spots dancing in his vision. He took a shaky breath, the recycled air tasting of ozone and fear. "Status report," he croaked. Tin Can, ever the stoic observer, had remained motionless through the ordeal. "Shields held at 17% integrity," it stated. "Minor structural stress detected in the aft cargo bay. All primary systems remain online. The energy wave was not a conventional blast. Captain, it was a data transmission. Elias stared at the android. A what? The energy wave carried a complex data packet. Tin Can elaborated. I have isolated and quarantined it in the ship's main computer core. It is encrypted with a quantum algorithm that is theoretically impossible to generate with known technology. Mira pushed herself upright, her knuckles white where she gripped the console. It sent us a message. It appears so. Tin Can confirmed. However, the message is not the most significant development. The android swiveled its head back to the main console and manipulated a control. The view screen zoomed in on the heart of the nebula, where the light had flared. The shimmering gas was thinner there, parting like a curtain, and in the center, where there had been only darkness before, hung a new celestial body. It wasn't a star or a planet. It was a perfect sphere of obsidian black, so dark it seemed to drink the light of the surrounding nebula. It was a hole in space, a flawless orb of non-existence that gave off no heat, no light, no radiation. Yet, the sensors were screaming. Gravitational readings are off the charts. Captain, Tin Can said, a note of what might have been electronic surprise in its voice. The object possesses a mass equivalent to a red giant star, yet it is no larger than our vessel. Furthermore, its gravitational field is not uniform. It is focused. A chill, colder than the vacuum outside, snaked its way down Elias's spine. Focused. What does that mean? Before the android could answer, the ship's comm system, silent for so long, crackled to life. It wasn't static. It was a voice, a clear, feminine voice, speaking in perfect, unaccented Terran standard. This is Surveyor Vessel Odyssey, the voice said, calm and measured, as if reporting a routine weather update. We have been waiting for you. Elias and Mira exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief. The Odyssey. That was impossible. The Odyssey was a ghost story, a cautionary tale told to rookie spacers. It was the first human starship to ever attempt a crossing of the Andromeda Expanse. Launched over 3 centuries ago, it had vanished without a trace, its last garbled message speaking of a silent song before it was lost to the void. Elias slowly reached for the comms panel, his hand trembling slightly. He keyed the transmit button. This is the salvage vessel Stardust Drifter, he said, his voice hoarse. Who is this? Repeat your last transmission. There was a pause, a beat of silence that stretched for an eternity, filled only by the haunting, alien music. Then the voice returned, and the calm, measured tone was gone, replaced by an undercurrent of something ancient and hungry. We are the choir, the voice said, a chilling smile in its words. And you have come to sing with us. The obsidian sphere on the view screen pulsed once, a beat of pure darkness, and the ship groaned around them, a final, mournful note of surrender. The song had them, and Elias Thorne knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the silence of the void was a mercy they would never know again. The journey into the heart of the unknown had just begun, and the price of curiosity was a command performance in a symphony of madness. The black sphere seemed to expand in his vision, a pupil dilating in the eye of the cosmos, and he felt a terrifying, irresistible pull, not just on his ship, but on his very soul, a gravitational tug toward the heart of that impossible, beautiful, and utterly malevolent music. He had sought the empty places, the quiet corners of the galaxy, but he had found the one place where silence was dead and something terrible had learned to sing. and it knew his name. The pull was not a physical force in any way Elias Thorne had ever understood. It wasn't the brute, indiscriminate tug of a star's gravity well or the focused, humming grip of a tractor beam. This was a line of unseen energy, a tendril of pure will that had hooked itself into the very soul of the stardust drifter and was reeling it in with a slow, agonizing certainty. He slammed his fist against the thruster controls, the worn panel flickering in protest. "Full reverse!" he roared, the command swallowed by the ship's groaning complaint and the ever-present, all-consuming song. The plasma engines flared, bathing the void behind them in a brilliant, desperate torrent of blue-white fire, a tantrum against the inevitable. Yet the ship did not slow. Its forward momentum toward the obsidian sphere continued unabated, as if its own engines were a complete irrelevance. It was like trying to swim against a waterfall that was pulling on the water itself. "Not on you." Mira stood frozen beside him, her datapad forgotten, her eyes locked on the impossible physics unfolding on the main screen. "It's not working, Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The inertia dampeners are redlining, but our velocity is constant. It's like the space between us and that thing is just being deleted." Tin Can swiveled its head, its single blue eye a point of unnerving calm in the chaotic symphony of alarms and alien music. "The captain is correct," the android stated, its synthesized voice cutting through the noise. "The phenomenon is not exerting an external force upon the ship. It is warping the space-time metric directly in front of our bow. We are not moving through space. Space itself is being contracted, drawing us toward the focal point." Elias slumped back in his chair, a cold wave of utter helplessness washing over him. How do you fight something that can rewrite the rules of the universe on a whim? The song shifted its melody, a subtle change in key that sent a fresh shiver of dread down his spine. The piercing high note, the one that had heralded the arrival of the sphere, grew stronger, and from the shimmering, opalescent veils of the nebula, a ghost emerged. It was the Odyssey. The legendary vessel was a specter of tarnished silver and black, its lines sleek and impossibly ancient, a design from a bygone era of boundless optimism and hubris. But it was wrong. 300 years in the void should have left it a pitted, lifeless hulk, scarred by micrometeoroids and cosmic radiation. Instead, its hull was eerily pristine, almost polished, but it was also changed. Crystalline structures, like giant, luminous barnacles, grew in fractal patterns across its superstructure, pulsing with a soft internal light that kept time with the song. Strange, web-like filaments, shimmering with the colors of an oil slick, connected different sections of the ship, giving it an unsettlingly organic appearance, as if the vessel itself had been infected, had grown into something new and monstrous. "By the rings of Saturn," Mira breathed, a hand covering her mouth. "It's alive." Elias could only nod, his throat too tight for words. He could see the ship's name emblazoned on the bow, the proud letters Symphony Odyssey, still perfectly legible, a tombstone for a crew and an era. The bridge of the lost ship was dark, its viewports like the vacant eyes of a skull. But as they were drawn inexorably closer, a single light flickered to life within, then another and another, until the entire command deck was illuminated in a cold, sterile white. He felt a voyeuristic dread, as if he were peering into a mausoleum that was suddenly showing signs of occupation. Tin Can, meanwhile, had been silently processing the data packet it had quarantined, A series of complex equations and alien glyphs began to scroll across a secondary screen, a language of pure mathematics that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. "I have achieved a partial decryption of the transmission, Captain," the android announced. "The quantum encryption is a form of evolving cipher. It rewrites itself based on the observer. The contents are extensive." Elias tore his gaze from the ghost ship. "Give me the short version." Tin Can. "The transmission is a historical record and a declaration of purpose," the android said. "The choir, as it calls itself, is a collective consciousness. It does not originate from our dimension. It is an entity that exists within the substrate of space-time, what it refers to as the Great Silence. Its song is the resonance of its existence." The android paused, its internal processors whirring audibly. "According to the record, the crew of the Odyssey were the first of our species to make contact. Their FTL drive, a primitive design by modern standards, tore a small wound in the silence, and the choir heard them. It was intrigued." Intrigued. The word hung in the air, dripping with predatory understatement. "What did it do to them?" Mira asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It offered them a gift," Tin Can replied. "The cessation of individuality, the dissolution of the ego into a greater, immortal whole. It calls this joining the song. The crew of the Odyssey did not accept the gift willingly. The choir was persuasive." On the screen, the crystalline structures on the Odyssey's hull pulsed with a brighter light, and the comms crackled again. The same calm, feminine voice echoing through the bridge of the drifter. "You are afraid. Elias Thorne." Elias froze, his blood turning to ice. It knew his name. "You have spent your life running from connection, from the noise of other minds. You seek the silence, but you have found the song, and the song knows you." How could it possibly know him? His past was buried deep, locked away in sealed corporate files and his own scarred memory. He had signed on to the Stardust Drifter under a sanitized identity, a ghost in the Galactic census. Mira looked at him, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. The monster wasn't just outside the ship, it was inside his head. "It is scanning our ship's databanks," Tin Can stated, its photoreceptor glowing a brighter, more urgent blue. "Its influence is permeating our systems. The data packet was a key, a program designed to unlock our ship from the inside. I am attempting to isolate the core, but the intrusion is elegant." The ship's systems began to betray them. The lights on the bridge pulsed in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, mirroring the glow of the Odyssey. The hum of the life support system began to harmonize with the low, guttural notes of the alien chorus. The Stardust Drifter, his sanctuary, his rusted-out shell, was learning the melody. It was beginning to sing. "We welcome you," the voice on the comms continued, a soothing, motherly tone that was more terrifying than any scream. "Your vessel is strong, a fine baritone for our chorus. Your minds are bright, clear notes to add to the harmony. There is no pain in the joining, only release. Release from fear, release from loneliness, release from the self." The pull intensified, and they were now so close to the Odyssey that it filled their entire view screen. A section of the crystalline growth on its dorsal side began to retract, peeling back like the petals of a grotesque flower. It revealed a docking bay, not of cold steel and warning lights, but of the same semi-organic, glowing material. It was an open maw, waiting to swallow them whole. Elias fought against the paralysis that gripped him. He had to do something. Anything. "Tin can," he ordered. His voice strained. "The data packet. You said it was a historical record. Is there anything in there? A weakness? A way to stop this?" The concept of weakness appears to be irrelevant to the choir. The android replied, "It does not conquer, it harmonizes. It does not destroy, it subsumes. There is one recurring theme in its history. However, a name, a designation for entities that are incompatible with the song." "What is it?" Elias demanded. "It calls them the dissonance." Before he could ask another question, the drifter was pulled through the glowing aperture. The docking clamps, crystalline and sharp, extended from the walls of the bay and pierced the drifter's hull with a sound of tortured metal. The clamps didn't just hold them, they burrowed in, glowing conduits snaking from their tips and interfacing directly with the ship's power and data conduits. The lights on the bridge flickered violently and then settled into a steady, soft glow, perfectly in sync with the pulsing of the bay around them. The song was no longer coming from outside. It was inside, vibrating through every deck plate, every wire, every molecule of recycled air. The main view screen, which had shown the interior of the docking bay, went black for a moment, then flickered back to life with a new image. It was the bridge of the Odyssey. Standing there in the cold white light were figures. They wore the tattered remnants of 300-year-old United Systems uniforms, but their bodies were horribly changed. Their skin was pale and translucent, with faint, glowing patterns beneath the surface. Their eyes were gone, replaced by smooth, unbroken skin. They stood motionless, their heads tilted slightly as if listening to a sound only they could hear. In the center, standing before the captain's chair, was a woman. Her uniform was better preserved, that of a commanding officer. Crystalline structures grew from her shoulders like epaulets, and her face, though eyeless, was turned directly toward the screen, toward them. "I am Captain Eva Rostova," the voice on the comm said, and Elias realized with a jolt of horror that the figure's mouth was not moving. The voice was coming directly from her, from all of them, a telepathic broadcast. "Welcome to the Odyssey. Welcome to the choir. It is time for your audition." The interior door to the Stardust Drifter's bridge hissed open, but it wasn't Mira or Tin Can who had opened it. It was the ship itself. Standing in the corridor beyond was not a member of the Odyssey's crew, but something else entirely. It was a bipedal figure, roughly human-shaped, but it was made of the same crystalline material as the growths on the ghost ship's hull. It held no weapon, but its very presence was a threat beyond comprehension. It took a step onto the bridge, its crystalline feet making no sound, and the song in Elias's head swelled to a crescendo, a wave of sound and pressure and alien ecstasy that threatened to shatter his mind and remake it into something new, something harmonious, something that was no longer his own. He was at the end of his run, a final, terrifying port of call in a place that wasn't on any map, and the only cargo he had left to trade was his soul. The crystalline being on the bridge of the Stardust Drifter was a perfect instrument of the choir's will. It did not move with the hesitant mechanics of a robot or the fluid grace of a living thing. It simply was. And then it was closer, standing in the center of the command deck without any discernible sense of transition. The song in Elias's mind exploded from a symphony into a deafening, soul-crushing wall of sound. It was no longer just a melody, it was a deluge of sensation, a psychic storm that ripped through the firewalls of his consciousness. He saw flashes of 1,000 alien suns, felt the crushing gravity of a gas giant's core, tasted the bitter dust of a dying moon, and heard the silent, screaming thoughts of a billion harmonized minds. This was the audition, a full immersion baptism into the choir's reality. Then his mind was the sacrificial lamb. He saw his own life, not as he remembered it, but as the choir saw it, a chaotic, discordant series of notes. He was back on Cygnus X-12, a corporate enforcer with a conscience he was trying to kill. He saw the faces of the striking miners, gaunt and desperate. He felt the cold weight of the pulse rifle in his hands, the vibration of the order crackling in his earpiece. Maintain order, all necessary force. And he saw the face of a young woman, no older than 20, her eyes full of fire and defiance. A moment before the chaos erupted, a moment before a stray shot, his shot snuffed that fire out forever. The memory, which he had buried under 2 decades of bourbon and the crushing emptiness of deep space, was laid bare, amplified. Every nuance of his failure and shame played back for him on a loop. This is your dissonance. The voice of Captain Rostova echoed in his skull. No longer a voice, but a feeling of profound, ancient pity. This is your pain. A singly jarring note in an otherwise meaningless melody. Let us tune it. Let us resolve the chord. Join the song. Elias Thorne, and this memory will be gone. You will not forget, you will understand. It will become a part of the harmony. Its sadness, a beautiful, necessary counterpoint in the great composition. You will be whole. The offer was seductive, a siren call to a man who had spent a lifetime trying to forget he was broken. He felt his own defenses begin to crumble, the walls of his identity eroding under the gentle, relentless pressure of that promise. The release would be so easy. Mira was experiencing her own version of the audition. For her, the choir did not offer release from pain, but the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. She was a botanist who had only ever known the sterile confines of orbital stations and terraforming biodomes. She saw what the choir showed her, a vision of life on a scale she could barely comprehend. She stood in a forest of crystalline trees on a world with a sapphire sky, where the wind through the branches played a perfect, resonant chord. She saw entire ecosystems thriving in the heart of nebulae, vast, interconnected networks of silicate flora that fed on starlight and exhaled pure energy. She saw life not as a fragile, chaotic struggle for survival, but as a perfect, self-regulating system, a garden the size of a galaxy. You seek to understand the patterns of life. The choir sang to her, its voice the rustling of a trillion leaves, but you study only a single, isolated verse. We can show you the entire epic. We are the gardeners of the cosmos. Join us, Mira Vos. Become the garden, her scientific curiosity, the very core of her being, was enthralled. The sheer beauty and complexity of what she was being shown was a temptation far greater than any promise of personal peace. To know, to truly understand. It was everything she had ever wanted. It was Tin Can who saved them. The crystalline avatar had ignored the android, its attention focused entirely on the 2 organic, chaotic minds on the bridge. The choir, for all its cosmic power, did not seem to understand the nature of the machine. It probed at Tin Can's consciousness and found nothing. No fear, no desire, no ego to dissolve. It found only cold, hard logic. It was like trying to harmonize with a wall. The android, meanwhile, was under its own kind of assault. The choir's intrusion into the ship's systems was not a brute force hack, but a subtle, pervasive rewriting of its core programming. The choir's song was a virus, and it was trying to teach the drifter how to sing. Tin Can's photoreceptor, which had been a steady blue, began to flicker erratically between blue and a deep, alarming red. Its internal monologue, had anyone been able to hear it, would have been a cascade of error reports and logical paradoxes. Query entity attempts to apply emotional harmonic algorithm to a non-emotional, logic-based system. Result, catastrophic type mismatch. Query, how can a system become part of a whole without integrating its processing functions? Proposition is illogical. Action, analyze the intruding song as pure data. Isolate recurring frequencies. Identify prime number sequences. Find the root of the code. And there, in the very structure of the song, in the mathematical core of the data packet it had received, Tin Can found it. A pattern, a bass rhythm that acted as the carrier wave for the entire psychic broadcast. It was an impossibly complex and elegant piece of mathematics. But like any system, it had rules, and any system with rules could be exploited. The android turned its head toward Elias, who was on his knees, clutching his head and his face a mask of agony. "Captain Thorne," Tin Can said, its voice flat but somehow urgent. "I have identified the fundamental carrier frequency of the choir's psychic transmission. It is based on a recursive, prime number-based algorithm. It is a system designed for perfect harmony." Elias looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his connection to the choir's vision momentarily severed by the android's voice. What are you saying?" he gasped. "A perfect system has no tolerance for imperfection," Tin Can stated. "Harmony cannot abide dissonance." And the word cut through the fog in Elias's mind. Dissonance, the thing the choir could not integrate. His pain, his shame, his chaotic, broken self that was his dissonance. It was the one thing that was truly his, and it was his only weapon. "Mira!" he yelled, forcing himself to his feet. "Fight it. Don't let it in. Find the flaw in its logic," Mira cried out, snapping her head back as if pulling herself from a trance. It's too perfect," she stammered, tears streaming down her face. "The symbiosis is flawless. There are no flaws." "Then make one," Elias roared, stumbling toward his command chair. He looked at the crystalline avatar, which now seemed to regard them with a sense of immense parental disappointment. He focused on the memory of the dead girl on Cygnus X-12, but instead of letting the choir soothe it, he embraced the jagged edges of the pain. He held on to the guilt, the self-loathing, the raw, ugly truth of it. He screamed it into his own mind, a silent, defiant howl of pure, unadulterated imperfection. "I am not a note to be tuned," he projected, aiming the thought like a spear. "I am the sound of a string breaking for the first time." The pressure in his head faltered. The choir recoiled, not in pain, but in a kind of shocked confusion, like a master composer hearing a child bang randomly on a piano. He looked at the android. "Tin Can you broadcast? Can you generate a signal?" "Affirmative, Captain," the android replied. "The ship's internal comms are still under my partial control." "Then do it," Elias ordered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Broadcast the most illogical, chaotic, dissonant thing you can think of. Flood this channel with noise. Give me a wrong note." Tin Can tilted its head. "My programming is based on logic and order. Generating true chaos is counterintuitive. However, I can broadcast a sequence known to be fundamentally incompatible with elegant mathematical systems. The android's photoreceptor glowed a solid, brilliant red. I will broadcast the first 10 million digits of pi. It was a stroke of insane genius. Pi, a transcendental number, infinite, non-repeating, the very definition of a pattern without resolution. It was the ultimate mathematical dissonance. A moment later, a new sound entered the bridge. It wasn't a sound in the air, but a sound in the mind, a psychic signal piggybacking on the choir's own network. It was a high-pitched, irritating static, a stream of random numbers that grated against the perfect harmony of the song. It was the mental equivalent of nails on a chalkboard. The crystalline avatar staggered back, a physical reaction that seemed impossible for a being of its nature. Cracks, like fissures in glass, appeared across its shimmering surface. The beautiful, all-encompassing song began to fracture, discordant notes tearing through the melody like static. The voice of Captain Rostova screamed in their minds, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that was a universe away from her previous calm. The psychic pressure vanished, replaced by a wave of pure, concentrated rage. The audition was over. The avatar raised its arm, and the crystalline material shifted, sharpening into a wicked, translucent blade. The time for persuasion had passed. The dissonance would not be harmonized. It would be silenced. The crystalline avatar moved with the speed of a collapsing thought. The blade on its arm wasn't just sharp. It was an edge of pure, conceptual severance. It didn't cut through air. It erased the space it passed through, leaving a shimmering, momentary void in its wake. Elias reacted on pure, desperate instinct. He shoved Mira sideways, sending her stumbling behind the main engineering console, and grabbed the only thing within reach, a heavy, magnetic wrench used for securing plasma conduits. It was a pathetic weapon, a primitive rock against a bolt of psychic lightning. But it was real. It was solid. It was dissonant. The avatar's blade sliced down where he had been a second before, striking the deck plate. There was no clang of metal on metal. Instead, a section of the floor bloomed into a fractal pattern of gray, lifeless crystal, and then shattered into 1,000 silent pieces. A wound not of impact, but of conversion. The song in Elias's head, now a fractured and enraged chorus, tried to paralyze him, to show him 1,000 ways to die, 1,000 reasons to surrender. But his own pain, his own ragged guilt from Cygnus X-12 was a shield of static. He held on to the memory of the dead miner, not as a source of shame, but as a source of fuel. Her defiant eyes were his defiance now. He swung the heavy wrench, a wild, clumsy arc that the creature should have avoided with contemptuous ease. But the sheer, unplanned chaos of the movement, a spasm of pure, unharmonious survival instinct, seemed to momentarily confuse it. The wrench connected with the avatar's side with a sound like a cathedral bell cracking. The creature reeled back, not from the force of the blow, but from the impact of such a crude, asymmetrical action. Where the wrench struck, its crystalline form flickered, its internal light sputtering like a dying bulb. "It's working!" Mira shouted from behind the console, her voice a mix of terror and discovery. The physical impacts, they disrupt its cohesion. She wasn't just hiding. Her fingers were flying across a diagnostic panel, her botanist's mind for patterns now analyzing the enemy's biology. Its form is held together by the song, our noise, Elias's chaos. It's introducing errors into its physical code. While Elias engaged in a desperate dance with the avatar, Ito and Tin Can remained the stoic center of their defense. The android was now multitasking on a level that would have melted a standard computer core. One part of its consciousness was maintaining the psychic broadcast of pi, a constant stream of irritating mathematical noise. Another part was fighting the choir's lingering influence in the ship's systems, shoring up firewalls and rerouting corrupted code. A third part was analyzing their terminal predicament. "Captain," the android's voice cut through the chaos. "While your physical dissonance is proving tactically effective against the Avatar, it does not address our primary strategic problem. The docking clamps are not merely holding us, they are feeding." On the main view screen, which now showed an external view, the truth of Tin Can's words was horrifyingly clear. The crystalline clamps that had impaled the Stardust Drifter were growing. Like invasive vines, shimmering tendrils were snaking out from the clamps, burrowing deeper into the ship's hull, their glowing tips pulsing as they tapped into power conduits and data lines. The Drifter wasn't just a prisoner, it was being consumed, its systems being forcibly harmonized, its steel and wire being taught the song of the choir. In a matter of minutes, their ship would become just another instrument in the orchestra, another section of the living, monstrous vessel that was the Odyssey. Elias parried another lightning-fast strike from the Avatar, the impact jarring his arm to the shoulder. The creature was adapting, its movements becoming less predictable, incorporating their own chaotic patterns. He was tiring, his age and the psychic strain taking their toll. "Mira, Tin Can, get us out of here," he yelled, gritting his teeth. "We have to break those clamps. Conventional explosives would be ineffective." Tin Can stated calmly. The crystalline structure would simply absorb and redistribute the energy. "Then think of something unconventional." Mira shot back, her mind racing. She looked from the struggling Elias to the pulsating clamps on the screen, and then at the stream of numbers Tin Can was projecting. Resonance. It was a basic principle of physics and biology. Every structure had a resonant frequency. If you matched it, you could shake it apart. The choir used harmony to build, to connect, to subsume. What if they could use their own noise to do the opposite? "Tin Can," she said, her voice sharp with sudden inspiration. "Your pi broadcast, is it just random static, or does it have a frequency?" "I am broadcasting the numerical sequence via a standard multiband radio signal," the android replied. "The frequency is variable, but I can focus it." "Do it," Mira commanded, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "Focus everything you have on the clamps. Reroute all non-essential power life support, gravity, everything to the main comms dish. We're going to turn your broadcast into a weapon. We're not going to sing to them. We're going to scream." It was a wild, desperate gamble. It would leave them powerless and vulnerable for a critical few seconds, and the feedback from that much-focused energy could fry every system they had. Elias bought them that time. He let out a roar and charged the Avatar, not with the wrench, but with his own body. A tackle of pure, unthinking desperation. The impact sent them both stumbling back. The creature's blade arm sliced across his ribs, and the pain was unlike anything he'd ever felt. It was a cold, sharp agony that didn't just cut flesh, but seemed to freeze it. He looked down and saw not blood, but a creeping, spiderweb-like pattern of gray crystal forming on the edges of the wound, spreading across his skin. He was being harmonized. "Now," he screamed, his voice thick with pain. "Do it now." On the console, Mira slammed a final sequence into place. The lights on the bridge died, plunging them into the red glow of emergency backups. The hum of the ship's systems fell silent, replaced by a single, rising, high-pitched whine that vibrated through the deck. On the view screen, The drifter's main communications dish, a large, ugly piece of salvage hardware bolted to the dorsal hull, began to glow with a terrifying intensity. A beam of pure, invisible energy, a focused stream of mathematical chaos, shot from the dish and slammed into the crystalline clamps. For a moment, nothing happened. The clamps pulsed, their internal light brightening as if they were feeding on the energy. The avatar on the bridge paused, tilting its head. Then, a high, singing note began to emanate from the clamps, a sound of immense structural stress. Cracks appeared, spreading through the crystalline structures like lightning. The single note became a chorus of shrieking, discordant tones. With a final, explosive pop of displaced energy, the clamps shattered into a billion motes of fading light. The physical connection was severed. The ship lurched as it was released from the Odyssey's grip. "Thrusters!" Mira yelled. Power flooded back to the bridge. Elias, clutching his crystallizing wound, threw himself into the command chair and slammed his hand down on the controls. The Stardust Drifter's old plasma engines roared to life, and the ship pulled away from the docking bay, back into the eerie, glowing nebula. The crystalline avatar, and its connection to the mothership, now severed, flickered violently. It let out a silent, psychic scream that cracked the bridge's main view screen, and then dissolved, collapsing into a pile of inert, gray dust. They were free, but as Elias looked at the screen, he saw that their escape had not gone unnoticed. The entire Sci-Fi Odyssey seemed to shudder in rage. The crystalline growths across its hull pulsed with a furious, blood-red light. It was no longer a ghost ship, it was a wounded predator. Its mission to harmonize them had failed. Now, it would simply erase the dissonance. "Captain," Tin Can said, its voice cutting through their momentary relief. "During the focused energy broadcast, our sensors detected a psychic backlash, a resonance echo. It did not originate from the Odyssey." Elias gritted his teeth against the spreading, crystalline cold in his side. "Then where did it come from?" he asked, already dreading the answer. The android turned its head, its photoreceptor fixed on the perfect, obsidian sphere that still hung in the heart of the nebula, a hole in the fabric of reality. "The signal originated from within the sphere," Tin Can stated. "Analysis suggests we have done more than anger the choir. We have awakened the conductor." And as if on cue, the black sphere pulsed, a single, slow beat of pure, absolute darkness, and the silent song of the void was replaced by a single, terrifying, and utterly dominant note that promised not harmony, but annihilation. The note that came from the obsidian sphere was not music. It was the antithesis of it. If the choir's song was a complex symphony, this was a single, resonant frequency tuned to the concept of uncreation. It was the sound of a universal constant being brought to zero. The Stardust Drifter, already wounded and weary, screamed under the assault. Every plate of its hull vibrated with the annihilating frequency, threatening to shear apart. On the bridge, red lights flashed in a frantic, desperate rhythm, a dying heartbeat against the monolithic drone. The crystalline wound on Elias's side was a nexus of agony, the cold spreading through his torso with an unnatural speed. The gray, fractal patterns branching across his skin like frost on a window pane. He could feel his own body being tuned to the conductor's note, its organic chaos being forcibly smoothed into a final, silent harmony. "It's collapsing the space-time around us," Mira yelled, her hands flying over her console, trying to make sense of the nonsensical readings. We're not in a nebula anymore. We're in a cage. The Odyssey is coming about. It's not going to capture us. It's going to erase us. The ghost ship, now glowing with a malevolent, blood-red light, turned with impossible grace. Weapons ports, previously hidden beneath the crystalline growths, opened like irises. They did not charge with energy or reveal missile tubes. They pulsed with a deep, throbbing darkness, preparing to fire bolts of pure, weaponized silence. Elias gripped the arms of his command chair, the spreading crystallization making his movement stiff and painful. He looked at Mira, her face illuminated by the flashing red alarms, her mind racing for a solution that didn't exist. He looked at Tin Can, who stood impassively, processing their imminent demise with the same logic it used to regulate the ship's oxygen. He had run his entire life, and now, at the very end, he was trapped in a dead end the size of a solar system. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. "Tin Can," he rasped, his voice strained. "The FTL drive. What's its status?" The question was a shot in the dark, a final, reflexive grasp for the coward's way out. "The FTL drive is online, Captain," the android reported. "However, a jump is impossible. The gravitational and spatial distortions from the primary anomaly, the sphere, would cause a catastrophic miscalculation. We would not be transported. We would be smeared across several dimensions simultaneously." "Smeared," Elias repeated, a grim smile touching his lips. He looked at the obsidian sphere on the screen, a perfect circle of nothing. He looked at the crystallizing wound on his side. Harmony, dissonance. The choir wanted to absorb him, to make his wrong note right. The conductor wanted to erase it completely. What was the most dissonant thing a man could do, not just to make noise, but to break the rules of the instrument itself? "Mira," he said, his voice suddenly calm and clear, the waver of fear gone. "You were a botanist. You know about invasive species, right? How they get into an ecosystem and tear it apart from the inside." Mira looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Yes, but what does that sphere," Elias said, pointing a trembling, gray-tipped finger at the screen. "It's a perfect system. Tin Can's noise. My brokenness. It confused the choir, but this thing, the conductor, it's not confused. It's just angry. You can't fight a perfect system on its own terms." He took a deep, rattling breath. "But you can feed it a paradox it can't solve." Understanding dawned in Mira's eyes, followed instantly by horror. "The FTL drive," she whispered. Tin Can said it would be a catastrophic miscalculation. "Exactly," Elias said, his gaze locked on the sphere. "The conductor is warping space-time, and our drive works by warping space-time. We're going to introduce a new impossible variable into its perfect equation. We're going to divide by zero." "Elias." "No," she said, her voice breaking. "That's a suicide run. The ship won't survive." "The ship was never going to survive," he replied, his voice gentle. He touched the spreading crystal on his chest. "Neither was I, but you will." He turned to the android. "Tin Can, get her to the escape pod. Now." "That's a direct order." "Elias, I won't leave you," Mira cried, grabbing his arm. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," he said, looking her in the eyes. His own blue eyes were starting to cloud with the gray film of the crystal. "I've spent my whole life making noise in all the wrong places, running from one mess to the next. It's time I made one final, ugly sound in the one place it might actually do some good. The voice of Captain Rostova, now laced with the conductor's cold fury, echoed in his mind. Your dissonance is an error. We will correct it. He smiled. You'll have to catch me first. Captain, Tin Can said, placing a metallic hand on Mira's shoulder. The captain's logic is sound. His sacrifice provides the highest probability of your survival. We must comply. Mira struggled for a moment, tears streaming down her face, but the android's grip was firm. She looked at Elias, to the man who had hidden his pain behind a wall of silence, who was now choosing to turn that pain into their salvation. Go, he mouthed. Tin Can led the sobbing Mira from the bridge. The Odyssey fired. A bolt of pure blackness shot toward them. Elias slammed the controls, and the drifter veered wildly. The bolt of nothingness passing so close it sheared off a communication antenna without a sound. He had only moments. He turned the ship, his beloved, rusted-out home, and aimed its nose directly at the heart of the abyss, the perfect obsidian sphere. He pushed the thrusters to their maximum, the old engines screaming a final, defiant protest. The ship surged forward, a single fleck of rust and iron charging into the face of God. The song of the conductor swelled in his head, a crushing weight of pure order and finality. It showed him visions of peace, of release from his guilt. It showed him the face of the miner from Cygnus X-12, smiling and forgiving. A final, beautiful and harmonious lie. He gritted his teeth and held on to the ugly truth. The crystal was at his throat now, his breaths shallow. His hands, fused to the controls, were sculptures of gray stone. The ship entered the sphere's event horizon. There was no sensation, just a complete and total absence of everything. No light, no sound, no stars, only the ship, himself, and the annihilating will of the conductor. The drifter began to buckle, its hull dissolving not into pieces, but into pure information that was being erased from existence. With his last ounce of will, his final act of dissonance, Elias Thorne reached for the FTL activation sequence. From the viewport of the tiny escape pod, tumbling away in the silent nebula, Mira and Tin Can watched. The Stardust Drifter vanished into the black sphere. For a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, there was only the perfect, terrifying darkness. Then, a single hairline crack of brilliant white light appeared on the surface of the sphere. The conductor let out a psychic shriek that transcended dimensions, a sound of pure, mathematical agony as an impossible variable was forced into its perfect equation. The crack spider-webbed, spreading across the face of the abyss. The sphere did not explode. It shattered. Reality itself broke. The hole in space-time collapsed, turned inward on itself, and with an implosion that made no sound but was felt in the very soul, it was gone. The conductor, the Odyssey, the nebula, and the song, all of it was dragged into the closing wound, erased as if it had never been. And then, there was only silence. A true, deep, and perfect silence. The kind of silence Elias Thorne had been searching for his whole life. Adrift in the vast and empty expanse. Mira looked out at the familiar, comforting blanket of distant stars. The silence of the void was no longer a lie. It was a gift, bought and paid for by a man who had finally made his discordant life sing a single, perfect, and ultimately triumphant note.